Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, we will discuss some of the top interview questions that are very probable to be asked in an deep learning interview. So let's start. What is deep learning? Deep learning is a subset of machine learning in which artificial neural networks, algorithms inspired by human brains, learn from large amount of data. These models can be used for a variety of tasks such as image and speech recognition, NLP, and decision making. Deep learning has led to breakthrough in many industries, from self-driving cars to medical diagnosis. It has become one of the most exciting and rapidly growing areas of artificial intelligence research and development. The mathematical equation for a single artificial neuron that is represented in this graph can be given by following: y is equal to f of the w1 x1 plus w2 x2 plus w3 x3 and so on, where y is the output of neuron. X1, x2, xn are some of the inputs that are given to the neuron. W1, W2, W3 and Wn are the weights associated with each input, and B is the bias data. F is activation function, and which is a non-linear function that determines the output of neuron. For a neural network with multiple layers, this equation is applied for each neuron in each layer, and the output of one layer becomes the input of the next layer. In addition to this, there are many types of activation functions such as sigmoid, tanh, ReLU, and many more. They can be chosen based on specific problem and architecture. The training process of neural network is an optimization problem. The goal is to find weights and biases that minimize the error between the predicted output and the actual output. This is typically done using an optimization algorithm such as stochastic gradient descent or backpropagation. So here is our first question. What is deep learning and how does it differ from traditional machine learning? A deep learning is a subset of machine learning that involves training artificial neural networks to perform tasks that are typically done by human brains, such as image and speech recognition, natural language processing, and decision making. It differs from traditional machine learning in that it uses multiple layers of artificial neurons, known as deep neural networks, to extract and process information from large and complex data sets. Second question is, how does weight initialization impact the performance of a deep learning model? Weight initialization is an important step in training a deep learning model, as it determines the starting point of the optimization process. If weights are initialized with small random values, the model will have a very hard time learning from the data, as the gradients will be too small. On the other hand, if the weights are initialized with large random values, the model will converge quickly, but it may not find the global minimum of the loss function. Choosing an appropriate weight initialization method such as He initialization or Glorot initialization can help improve the performance of the model. Next question is, can you explain the difference between a perceptron and a sigmoid neuron? A perceptron is a single layer neural network that uses a linear activation function and is used for binary classification. A sigmoid neuron is a single layer neural network that uses a sigmoid activation function and can be used for both binary and multi-class classification. Next question is, can you explain how backpropagation works in a neural network? A backpropagation is the process by which an artificial neural network learns from its errors. It is used to adjust the weights of the network's neuron in order to minimize the error between network's predictions and the actual output. The process starts by forwarding the input through the network to calculate the output, then propagated back through the network, and then weights are adjusted in such a way that error is minimized. What are some common activation functions used in neural networks? Some common activation functions used in neural networks include sigmoid, ReLU, that is rectified linear unit, and tanh, that is hyperbolic tangent. Sigmoid maps any input value to a value between 0 and 1 and is often used in the output layer of a binary classification problem. ReLU maps any input value less than 0 to 0 and any value greater than 0 or equal to 0 to the input value itself. For example, if some value is some output by a neuron is -1, then it will be converted to 0. Otherwise, if output of that neuron is 0 0.1, then it will be assigned as 0 0.1. ReLU helps to alleviate the vanishing gradient problem. 10H maps any value to a value between minus 1 and 1 and is often used in the hidden layers of a network. How do you prevent overfitting in neural network? Overfitting occurs when a model is trained too well on the training data and performs poorly on the new unseen data, that is test data. There are several techniques that can be used to prevent overfitting in a neural network, such as regularization, early stopping, dropout, and cross-validation. Regularization involves adding a penalty term to the loss function to discourage the network from assigning large weights to the certain neurons. Early stopping involves the monitoring the performance of the network on a validation set and stopping the training when performance starts to plateau. Dropout involves randomly turning off a certain percentage of neuron during training and in order to reduce the dependency of the network on a particular neuron. Cross-validation involves dividing the data into multiple data sets or subsets and training and evaluating the model on the different subsets in order to get a better estimate of the model's performance on unseen data. How do you handle missing data in a neural network? First is mean imputation. Handling missing data in a neural network can be challenging. One common approach is to simply remove any sample that contains missing data, but this may lead to a loss of information. Another approach is impute the missing values using techniques such as mean imputation, median imputation, or multiple imputation. A more sophisticated approach is to use a neural network to predict the missing values based on other available information. So the next question is, can you explain the concept of transfer learning in deep learning? A transfer learning is the process of using a pre-trained neural network as a starting point for a new task. It involves taking the weights of a network that has already been trained on a large dataset and using them as a initial weights for a new network that is being trained on a smaller dataset. This can be useful when there is a shortage of data for a particular task or when the new task is similar to the original task. By using the pre-trained network as a starting point, the new network can learn from the features that were learned by the original network and thus requires less data and less training time to achieve good performance. How do you evaluate the performance of a deep learning model? Evaluating the performance of a deep learning model can be challenging as it depends on the specific task and characteristic of the data. Common metrics used to evaluate the performance of a deep learning model include accuracy, precision recall, F-score, and ROC-AUC curve. Another common method is to evaluate the model on unseen test data and compare the performance with other models. It is also important to consider the business impact of the model and how well it meets the needs of the end users. Next question is, can you explain the difference between a CNN and a RNN? A CNN is a type of neural network that is used for image and video processing. It uses convolutional layers to learn features from the data and reduce the dimensionality. A RNN is a type of neural network that is used for a sequential data such as time series or natural language. It uses recurrent connections to allow information to flow through the network and maintain a memory of the previous inputs. So, what is the difference between overfitting and underfitting? Overfitting occurs when a model is trained too well on the training data and as a result it performs poorly on unseen data. This is because the model has learned the noise in the training data. Underfitting occurs when a model is not trained well enough on the training data set and as a result it also performs poorly on the unseen data as well. This is usually because the model is too simple and cannot learn the underlying patterns in the data. So what is the purpose of a dropout in neural network? Dropout is a regularization technique used to prevent the overfitting in a neural network by randomly dropping out the neurons during training. This helps to reduce the co-adaptation of neurons, which can occur when neurons in a neural network become too reliant on one another. How does batch normalization works? Batch normalization is a technique used to normalize the activation of a neural network, which helps to stabilize the training process and speed up convergence. It works by normalizing the activation of each layer by subtracting the batch mean and dividing the batch by standard deviation. This helps to ensure that the inputs to each layer have a similar scale, which can help to prevent the vanishing or exploding gradient descent. Next question is, what is the role of activation function in a neural network? The activation function in a neural network is used to introduce non-linearity into the network. Without non-linearity, a neural network would just be a linear model and would not be able to learn complex relationships in the data. Activation functions such as sigmoid, ReLU, and 10H are used to introduce non-linearity into the network by squashing the input to a certain range, such as 0 and 1 or between -1 and 1. What is the difference between a deep neural network and a shallow neural network? A deep neural network is a neural network with many layers, typically more than 3 layers. But a shallow neural network, on the other hand, is a neural network with only one or two layers. In general, deep neural networks are able to learn more complex features and representation of the data than shallow neural networks, but they are also more computationally expensive and can be more difficult to train. What is the difference between gradient descent and stochastic gradient descent? Gradient descent is an optimization algorithm used to find the minimum of a function by moving in the opposite direction of the gradient of the function. Stochastic gradient descent, that is SGD, is an optimization algorithm that uses random samples of the data to estimate the gradient of the function rather than using the full dataset. SGD is an approximation of the gradient descent and is often used when the dataset is too large to be processed in the memory. What are recurrent neural networks? RNNs are a type of neural network that are particularly well suited for sequential data, such as time series or natural language text. RNN use a feedback loop or a recurrence to process sequence of a variable length and maintain an internal memory of past inputs. What is the difference between a validation set and a test set in deep learning? A validation set is used to tune the hyperparameters of a model and evaluate its performance during the training process. A test set is used to evaluate the final performance on the model after training process is completed and the hyperparameters have been chosen. What is the difference between feed-forward neural network and recurrent neural network? Feed-forward neural network is a type of neural network where the data flows in one direction from input layer to output layer without loops. In contrast, a RNN has a feedback loop or recurrence which allows it to maintain an internal memory of past inputs and process sequences of variable length. Can you explain the concept of weight initialization in deep learning? Weight initialization is the process of setting the initial values of the weights in a neural network. Proper weight initialization is important because it can affect the speed and stability of the training process. There are several methods for weight initialization, such as random initialization, initialization, which are designed to prevent the vanishing or exploding gradient descent problem. What is different between softmax function and a sigmoid function? A softmax function is a generalization of the sigmoid function, commonly used in the output layer of a neural network for multi-class classification problem. Softmax function produces a probability distribution over the classes, while the sigmoid function produces a probability value between 0 and 1 for binary classification only. Can you explain the concept of ensemble learning in deep learning? Ensemble learning is a technique that combines the predictions of the multiple models to improve overall performance. This can be achieved by multiple models independently and then averaging their predictions, or by training a single model that combines the predictions of multiple submodels. Ensemble learning can increase the robustness and generalization of the model. Can you explain the concept of weight decay in deep learning? Weight decay is a regularization technique that aims to prevent overfitting by adding a penalty term to the loss function based on the magnitude of the weights. It works by encouraging the weights to be small, which in turn reduces the complexity of the model. This can be achieved by adding a term to the loss function that is proportional to the sum of squares of the weights. The next question is, what is the difference between L1 and L2 regularization in deep learning? L1 regularization is a technique that adds a penalty term to the loss function that is proportional to the absolute value of weights, while L2 regularization is a technique that adds a penalty term to the loss function that is proportional to the square of the weights. L1 regularization tends to drive the weights of a model towards 2 0, resulting in a sparse model with fewer non-zero weights, while L2 regularization tends to drive the weights of the model towards smaller values, but not necessarily zero. Next question is, what is the role of learning rate in deep learning? The learning rate is a hyperparameter that determines the step size at which the optimizer updates the weights of the model during training. A larger learning rate can lead to a faster convergence, but also a higher risk of overshooting the optimal solution. A smaller learning rate can lead to slower convergence, but also a lower risk of overshooting the optimal solution. Can you explain the concept of early stopping in deep learning? Early stopping is a technique used to prevent overfitting by stopping the training process before the model reaches to the point of overfitting. It works by monitoring the performance of the model on a validation set during training and stopping the training when performance of the validation set starts to deteriorate. Can you explain the concept of augmentation in deep learning? Data augmentation is a technique used to artificially increase the size of a dataset by applying a series of operations to the existing data. These operations can include random cropping, flipping, rotation, scaling, and other forms of image processing. Data augmentation can help to reduce overfitting and improve the generalization of a model by creating new slightly different versions of the original dataset. So what is the difference between batch normalization and layer normalization? Batch normalization normalizes the activations of the previous layer by the mean and standard deviation of the mini batch. Layer normalization normalizes the activation functions of the previous layer by the mean and standard deviation of the entire layer. While both techniques are used to stabilize the training process and improve the performance of the model, batch normalization is typically used in feed-forward neural networks, while normalization is used in recurrent neural networks. Can you explain the concept of the long short-term memory LSTM neural network. The long short-term memory network is a type of RNN that is particularly well suited for sequential data such as time series data or natural language text. LSTMs are LSTMs use a special type of memory cell called an LSTM cell, which can selectively store and retrieve information from the past. This allows LSTMs to maintain an internal memory of the past inputs and process sequence of variable lengths. What is difference between a generative model and a discriminative model in deep learning? A generative model is a type of model that learns to generate new data that is similar to the training data, while a discriminative model is a type of model that learns to distinguish between different classes of data. Generative models are typically used to generate new data such as image or text, while discriminative models are typically used for classification tasks. Can you explain the concept of the generative adversarial networks, GANs? A generative adversarial network is a type of model that consists of two neural networks, a generator and a discriminator. The generator network is trained on to generate new data that is similar to the training data, while discriminator network is trained to distinguish between the generated data and the real data. The two networks are trained together, while the generator trying to produce data that can fool the discriminator and discriminator trying to correctly identify the generated data. GANs are widely used for tasks such as image synthesis, text generation, and other forms of data generation. Can you explain the concept of attention mechanism in deep learning? Attention mechanism is a technique used to focus on specific parts of the input in a neural network. It allows the model to selectively attend the different parts of the input, such as different words in a sentence or different regions in an image, and to weight the importance of each part differently. Attention mechanisms are widely used in tasks such as machine translation, image captioning, and other tasks that involves sequential data or multimodal data. I hope you enjoyed the video and it added some knowledge to your brain. And if you have liked the video, please don't forget to subscribe my channel and turn on the notification. Thanks for watching.